I bought a beachfront house and let everyone believe I lived there alone and friendless. My son invited his girlfriend's family to show off his new beach house. When they arrived, I was already on the veranda, being interviewed by a TV crew about the new owner of the mansion. The call from James came on a Tuesday, just as I was reviewing the final landscaping plans for the native coastal garden. "Mom, I need a favor," he said, that familiar tone in his voice, the one he'd perfected since childhood whenever he wanted something. "Something important has come up this weekend." I smiled to myself, tracing my finger along the blueprint for the tidal pool educational exhibit I was building on the property. At 58, I'd grown accustomed to my son's emergencies, which typically involved impressing someone with resources that weren't actually his. "What kind of favor, James?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. "I was hoping you could postpone moving into the beach house this weekend, just for 2 days. He paused, then added with practiced casualness, "I want to show some friends around the area, and it would be perfect if they could stay there." The beach house, my $6 million oceanfront property in Seaglass Cove, the dream I'd worked 35 years to achieve. The home I'd purchased after building my real estate development company from nothing into a silent empire. The same home that the locals simply referred to as the Hayes Place, assuming I was just a quiet widow who'd somehow managed to afford a beautiful retirement spot. "What friends would these be?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer. "Olivia's parents are coming to town," he admitted. "The Westfields. I've told you about them. They own Westfield luxury brands." "Ah, yes, the handbag people," I said. Victor and Camilla Westfield's company was notorious for its advertising campaigns that essentially shamed people for not owning their products. Their daughter Olivia seemed pleasant enough the one time I'd met her, though she'd looked at my sensible shoes and modest car with barely concealed pity. "They're more than handbags, Mom. They're a full luxury lifestyle brand," James corrected with the slightest edge of irritation. "And they're very interested in beachfront property investments. If they like the area." He let the implication hang. James had been dating Olivia for 8 months, and I recognized this for what it was, an attempt to impress potential in-laws by pretending my house was his achievement. "So you want them to believe the house is yours?" I asked directly. A moment of awkward silence followed, before James laughed nervously. "Not exactly. I just thought it would be nice for them to see it, and maybe not have to get into the whole explanation about, about how your mother, who lives like a middle-class retiree most of the time, actually owns a multi-million-dollar beachfront property," I supplied. "It's just complicated to explain to people like the Westfields," James said defensively. "They value a certain lifestyle, consistency." What my son meant, but wouldn't say directly, was that he was embarrassed by my choices. Despite my success, I'd raised him in a comfortable but modest home. I drove a 3-year-old sedan rather than a luxury vehicle. I wore clothes for comfort rather than labels. To the Westfields, I would be an anomaly, wealthy but without the trappings they valued. "There's a nice hotel in Oak Ridge Bay," James continued. "I could book you a spa weekend. My treat." I almost laughed at the irony of my son offering to treat me to a hotel stay so he could pretend my house was his. Instead, I thought about the message I'd received just yesterday, a last-minute opportunity that seemed almost providential now. "Actually, I was planning to be out this weekend anyway," I lied smoothly. "You're welcome to use the house." "Really?" The relief in his voice was palpable. "That's perfect. We'll just be there Saturday and Sunday. I promise we'll leave everything exactly as we found it." "I'm sure you will," I replied. "There's just one small thing. A maintenance technician might stop by on Saturday afternoon to check on the HVAC system. Just let him in if that happens." "No problem," James agreed eagerly. "Thanks, Mom. This means a lot." After hanging up, I sat on my terrace overlooking the Pacific, contemplating the situation. I had worked my entire adult life to build my company, Hayes Sustainable Developments, from a one-woman operation into one of the most respected, eco-conscious real estate development firms on the West Coast. I had raised James alone after his father died when he was just 7. I had sacrificed, invested, worked 70-hour weeks, all while trying to instill values of honesty and hard work in my son. Before I finish telling my story, please subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments what time you are listening to me. Yet somewhere along the way, James had developed the notion that appearances mattered more than reality. He'd become increasingly fixated on impressing others with symbols of wealth rather than actual achievements. His middle management marketing position somehow became executive leadership in his telling. His rented luxury apartment was described as my place in the exclusive West Side district, and now, apparently, my beach house was about to become his latest prop. I picked up my phone and dialed a number. "Melanie Winter's office," answered a crisp voice. "This is Eleanor Hayes. I'm calling about the interview request for Properties with Purpose. I believe we were tentatively scheduled for next month?" "Yes, Ms. Hayes. Let me pull up that file. I'm wondering if Ms. Winters might be available this Saturday instead? Something unexpected has come up, and I think it might actually make for a more interesting segment." After finalizing the new arrangements, I smiled to myself. For years, I had allowed James to maintain his illusions, to pretend to be someone he wasn't. I had hoped he would eventually grow out of it, find confidence in his actual abilities rather than fictional achievements. Perhaps it was time for a different approach, a gentle but necessary reality check. I looked out at the ocean waves crashing against the shore below my property. Like those waves, truth had a way of eventually breaking through any barrier, no matter how carefully constructed. This weekend, the tide would finally be coming in. The next 3 days passed in a flurry of activity as I prepared for Saturday's unexpected convergence of events. Melanie Winters and her production team were enthusiastic about the schedule change, particularly when I hinted at the authentic family dynamics that might unfold on camera. They didn't need to know the specifics. The promise of unscripted human interaction was enough to secure their interest. "We'll arrive at 10 on Saturday morning to set up," Melanie had confirmed in our follow-up call. "The actual interview will begin around 2 in the afternoon. Is that timeline still convenient for you, Eleanor?" "Perfect," I replied. "My son and his guests should arrive around 3. We'll be well into the interview by then." "Wonderful. Genuine family reactions always make for compelling television," she said, enthusiasm evident in her voice. "And you're comfortable with us capturing whatever happens naturally?" I thought about James, about the years of watching him construct elaborate fictions about his life, his accomplishments, his finances, about the increasing distance between us as he chased approval from people like the Westfields. "Absolutely," I answered. "I think it's time for some authenticity in front of the cameras." Friday evening, I received a text from James. "All set for tomorrow. We'll arrive around 3. Thanks again for this, Mom. You're the best." I responded with a simple thumbs-up emoji. No need to elaborate or hint at what awaited him. Some lessons were best learned through experience. Saturday morning dawned bright and clear, the kind of perfect coastal day that real estate developers and tourism boards dream about. Sunlight sparkled on the azure water visible from every east-facing window of my home. The scent of sea salt and jasmine drifted through the open French doors leading to the main veranda. Melanie's production team arrived precisely at 10, moving with the practiced efficiency of people accustomed to transforming private spaces into temporary studios. They positioned lighting, arranged seating on the expansive veranda to capture the best background of ocean and coastline, and conducted sound tests with minimal disruption. "This property is absolutely stunning, Ms. Hayes," said the young production assistant, as she helped me adjust the wireless microphone discreetly inside my linen blouse. "The integration of the structure with the natural landscape is remarkable." "Thank you," I replied. That was intentional. I wanted the house to feel as though it emerges from the coastline rather than imposing itself upon it. "Well, it certainly achieves that," she smiled. "Melanie's going to focus a lot on your conservation plans for the property, especially the Marine Education Center you're building. It's exactly the kind of purpose-driven ownership our viewers connect with." By 1:30, hair and makeup were complete, transforming me from my usual natural appearance to a slightly more polished version suitable for television. I'd chosen to wear simple but elegant clothing, a pale blue linen shirt, tailored white pants, and low sandals. No designer labels, no statement jewelry, nothing that screamed wealth. Just quiet elegance and comfort, exactly as I preferred in my daily life. Melanie Winters arrived at 1:45, her presence immediately energizing the space. In person, she was smaller than she appeared on television, but her charisma was even more palpable. "Eleanor, it's a pleasure to finally meet you," she said, clasping my hand warmly. I've been fascinated by your approach to development since I first read about Hayes' sustainable developments in that Fortune profile last year. The pleasure is mine, I responded. Though I'm still surprised anyone finds my work television-worthy. Melanie laughed, a genuine sound that immediately put me at ease. Are you kidding? A woman who built a development empire focused on environmental sustainability, who lives modestly despite significant wealth, and who's now creating a marine education center for the community. You're exactly the kind of wealth steward we want to highlight. As we settled onto the veranda for the interview, I felt a momentary twinge of guilt about what I was setting up. James would undoubtedly be humiliated. The Westfields would be caught completely off guard. Was this really the best way to address the situation? But then I remembered James's most recent Christmas visit, when he'd spent the entire time making excuses for why I couldn't join his dinner with the Westfields. They're very particular about their social circle, he'd explained awkwardly, and your views on consumerism might make things uncomfortable. My resolve hardened. Sometimes a single moment of uncomfortable truth was kinder than years of enabling delusion. At precisely 2 o'clock, the cameras began rolling. Melanie was a masterful interviewer, beginning with questions about my background and the founding of my company before smoothly transitioning to my philosophy on wealth and success. You've achieved what many would consider exceptional financial success, she noted, yet you've chosen to live relatively modestly until this property purchase. Why is that? I've never equated wealth with objects, I explained. To me, financial success provides freedom and options, not a mandate to consume. This house is my first significant indulgence, and even it serves a greater purpose than mere ownership. We discussed my plans for the property, how part of it would become a marine education center for local schools, how the grounds were being landscaped exclusively with native species to demonstrate coastal conservation, how I'd worked with environmental engineers to ensure minimal impact on the delicate ecosystem. It's fascinating, Melanie observed, especially in today's culture of conspicuous consumption and status signaling, to meet someone who views wealth primarily as a responsibility rather than a license for excess. Money simply amplifies who you already are, I replied. If you value meaningful impact over appearances before wealth, that's unlikely to change after acquiring it. The interview flowed naturally as we walked through various parts of the property. We were back on the main veranda, discussing my late husband and single parenthood, when I heard the distinctive sound of tires on the gravel driveway. That would be my son, I said to Melanie with a small smile. He wasn't expecting me to be home today, and he certainly wasn't expecting a television crew. Melanie raised an eyebrow, instantly sensing the potential for compelling television. Is that so? Well, spontaneous family reunions always make for authentic moments. We continued the interview as voices drifted up from the front of the house. I heard James's animated tone as he presumably gave his grand tour introduction to the Westfields. Wait until you see the view from the main veranda. On clear days like this, you can see all the way to the headlands. Then came the moment I'd been anticipating for 3 days. James rounded the corner onto the veranda, gesturing expansively, flanked by Olivia and her parents. And this is where I spend most of my mornings, just taking in the... He froze mid-sentence, his expression transforming from confident tour guide to stunned disbelief in an instant. His eyes darted from me to the camera crew to Melanie Winters, whom he undoubtedly recognized from television. "Mom?" he managed finally. "What are you... I thought you were..." "Hello, darling," I said pleasantly, rising from my seat. "What perfect timing. We're just filming a segment about the house for properties with purpose. Come join us and bring your friends." The cameras captured every moment of his speechless confusion, and behind him, the slowly dawning comprehension on the faces of Victor and Camilla Westfield that something was very, very wrong with the narrative they'd been sold. "James!" Melanie exclaimed, professional enough to seamlessly incorporate this unexpected development into our interview. "What perfect timing. Eleanor was just telling us about her vision for this remarkable property. I'd love to get your perspective as well." James stood frozen, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Behind him, the Westfields exchanged confused glances, while Olivia's eyes darted between her boyfriend and me, putting pieces together in real time. I thought you were away this weekend," James finally managed, his voice unnaturally high. "Change of plans," I replied calmly. When Properties with Purpose called about featuring the house, I couldn't pass up the opportunity. You remember I mentioned someone might come by today? The deliberate mischaracterization of my maintenance technician warning hung in the air between us. James's face flushed deep red as understanding dawned that I had known and planned this encounter. Properties with Purpose, Camilla Westfield repeated slowly, her perfectly maintained facade showing the first cracks of confusion. The show about remarkable homeowners? That's right, Melanie confirmed, turning her attention to the new arrivals. We feature exceptional properties and the visionaries behind them. Eleanor's sustainable oceanfront development is exactly the kind of mindful luxury we love to highlight. Eleanor's development, Victor Westfield said flatly, his gaze hardening as it shifted to James. I felt a momentary pang of sympathy for my son, but pressed forward. James, why don't you introduce me to your friends properly? Caught in his own web, James had little choice but to comply. Mom, this is Olivia Westfield, my girlfriend, and her parents, Victor and Camilla Westfield. Everyone, this is my mother, Eleanor Hayes. Lovely to meet you all, I said, extending my hand. Please join us. The cameras don't bite. Mrs. Hayes, Victor said stiffly, accepting my handshake with visible reluctance. I'm afraid there seems to be some confusion. James invited us here to see his new beach house. Did he? I raised an eyebrow, looking directly at my son. How interesting. The cameraman adjusted his position slightly, capturing the tension from the perfect angle. Melanie, ever the professional, recognized compelling television when she saw it. James, did I misunderstand? She asked innocently. I thought this was your mother's property. The title records we researched for the show indicated Eleanor Hayes as the sole owner. James swallowed hard, trapped by his own fabrication with multiple witnesses, and most damagingly, cameras recording his every reaction. It's complicated, he stammered. Mom and I have an arrangement. What arrangement is that? I asked, genuinely curious what explanation he would invent on the spot. Olivia stepped forward, her designer sundress and carefully arranged hair suggesting she'd dressed for a very different kind of day than the one unfolding. James told us he purchased this property last month, she said directly. He mentioned you might be staying here occasionally as his guest. The audacity nearly made me laugh. My own home, reduced to a place where I might be permitted to, occasionally, stay? The son I'd raised, claiming credit for my life's achievement? I see, I replied, keeping my voice level. That certainly would be an arrangement if it were true. Mom, James began, but I held up my hand. Let me clarify for everyone, I said, addressing not just the Westfields, but also the cameras. I purchased this property 6 months ago after selling my controlling interest in Hayes Sustainable Developments, the company I founded 35 years ago. It represents not just a home for me, but the cornerstone of my next chapter, creating a marine education center for local schools and demonstrating sustainable coastal living. Melanie, sensing the perfect segue, jumped in. Which brings us back to what we were discussing before your guests arrived. Eleanor, you mentioned allocating part of the property for public education access. Could you elaborate on that vision? With practiced ease, I returned to my interview, explaining my plans for the property, while the Westfields stood awkwardly at the edge of the frame, clearly unsure whether to stay or leave. James had backed slightly away from the group, his expression a mixture of mortification and panic. What fascinates me, Melanie continued, is how differently people choose to display their success. Eleanor, you've mentioned prioritizing impact over appearance. I'd be curious, she turned smoothly to include the Westfields, to hear other perspectives on this. Mr. and Mrs. Westfield, as successful business owners yourselves, how do you view the relationship between wealth and its external signifiers? It was a masterful interviewer's move, incorporating the unexpected guests into the narrative while highlighting the philosophical contrast that hung unspoken in the air. Victor Westfield, caught off guard but clearly accustomed to public speaking, stepped forward. Well, at Westfield Luxury Brands, we believe quality and craftsmanship should be visible, he stated with practiced confidence. There's no virtue in hiding success. Our customers understand that displaying achievement motivates further achievement. How interesting, Melanie responded, almost a direct counterpoint to Eleanor's philosophy. Eleanor, you've built significant wealth, yet chosen not to signal it through typical luxury markers. Why is that? I've simply never found that ownership defined my worth, I replied. Objects are tools or pleasures, not identity. Camilla Westfield gave a small, dismissive laugh. With all due respect, this house hardly suggests minimalism, Mrs. Hayes. Oceanfront property is perhaps the ultimate status symbol. The difference, I countered gently, is in purpose. This house serves a function beyond status: education, conservation, community benefit. It's not about who has the biggest view or most impressive address. The camera panned to capture the Westfields' reactions: Victor's thinly veiled disapproval, Camilla's forced smile, and Olivia's growing discomfort. James remained at the periphery, seemingly trying to become invisible. Let's talk about your journey to this point, Melanie suggested, seamlessly moving the interview forward. Many of our viewers are inspired by stories of self-made success. How did Hayes Sustainable Developments begin? As I shared the story of starting my company with nothing but a drafting table in my garage after my husband's death, I watched the Westfields' expressions shift. Despite themselves, they seemed captivated by the authenticity of my narrative, so different from the fabricated version their daughter's boyfriend had presented. I never had investors or family money, I explained. Every property, every project was built on reinvested earnings and sweat equity. When developers were erecting cookie-cutter subdivisions, I was designing sustainable communities with minimal environmental impact. It wasn't the fastest route to wealth, but it was the one that let me sleep at night. Olivia had drifted away from her parents to stand near the veranda railing, looking out at the ocean. Her body language suggested inner conflict, perhaps reassessing what she thought she knew about James, about wealth, about what truly mattered. When the cameras paused for a brief setup adjustment, Victor approached me directly, his voice low and controlled. Mrs. Hayes, I don't appreciate being misled about the ownership of this property. Your son has created a highly inappropriate situation. I agree completely, I replied calmly, and I apologize for my son's misrepresentation. But I'm curious, would you have viewed him differently if you'd known the truth about his circumstances? The question hung between us, uncomfortably direct. Victor's expression hardened, but before he could respond, the cameras were rolling again, and we all resumed our positions for the next segment of what had become a very different kind of interview than anyone had anticipated. When Melanie called for a 15-minute break, the atmosphere on the veranda crackled with tension. The production crew busied themselves adjusting equipment, creating the illusion of privacy, while remaining close enough to capture any compelling exchanges. "Mother, can I speak with you?" James asked through clenched teeth, gesturing toward the French doors leading inside. "Privately," I nodded, following him into the living room. Through the windows, I could see the Westfields huddled in conversation at the far end of the veranda, Camilla gesticulating emphatically, while Victor checked something on his phone. Once inside, James rounded on me. "What the hell are you doing?" he hissed. "You deliberately set me up to look like a fool." "Did I?" I kept my voice calm. "I simply agreed to an interview about my home. You're the one who claimed it belonged to you. You knew exactly what would happen. You could have warned me, like you warned me about bringing the Westfields here under false pretenses," I countered. "About presenting my life's work as your latest acquisition?" James ran a hand through his carefully styled hair, disheveling it in frustration. "You don't understand. The Westfields are important. Olivia is important to me. I needed to impress them." "With lies?" I asked quietly. "Is that really the foundation you want to build a relationship on?" "It's not that simple," he insisted. "They value certain things: success, achievement, status. And you thought the only way to demonstrate those was by pretending to own something you don't? Look who's talking," he shot back. "You've been playing down your success my entire life, living in that modest house in the suburbs when you could afford much better, driving ordinary cars, acting like we were just comfortable when all along you were—" He gestured expansively at the oceanfront mansion around us. "Capable of this." His words revealed the heart of his resentment, a perspective I hadn't fully appreciated until now. In his mind, I had been the one concealing reality, denying him the status markers he craved. "I never hid my success from you, James," I said carefully. "I simply chose not to define myself by possessions. There's a difference between modesty and deception." "Well, your modesty made me look like a liar in front of my girlfriend's parents," he snapped. "What am I supposed to tell them now?" "The truth might be a refreshing start," I suggested. that you're a talented marketing manager building your career legitimately, that you don't need to invent accomplishments to be worthy of respect. He laughed bitterly. You really don't get it. In their world, in Olivia's world, being on your way up isn't enough. You either matter or you don't. And if that's truly how they measure human worth, I asked gently, are they people whose approval you should be seeking? Before he could answer, the French doors opened, and Olivia stepped inside, her expression unreadable. Sorry to interrupt, she said stiffly. My parents are asking whether we should leave or continue with this interview situation. James looked panicked. Olivia, I can explain. Can you? She interrupted, her voice tight. Because I'd really like to understand why you told us you'd purchased this house, why you've been pretending your mother is just some middle-class retiree when she's clearly a successful businesswoman, why everything you've told me about your financial situation appears to be fabricated. I moved toward the door. I'll give you two some privacy to sort this out. No, please stay, Mrs. Hayes, Olivia said, surprising me. Since we're finally getting honest, I'd prefer all cards on the table. She turned back to James. Well? James looked trapped, his gaze darting between us. I never exactly said I purchased the house, he began weakly. I just didn't correct certain assumptions. You specifically told my father you closed on the property last month, Olivia countered. Those were your exact words when you showed him photos of the view. It was aspirational, James attempted. Something I'm working toward. Olivia shook her head in disbelief. And your executive position? Your investment portfolio? The vacation home in Aspen you mentioned last Christmas? All aspirational too? James's silence was answer enough. I thought so, she said quietly. Then, turning to me, Mrs. Hayes, I apologize for the awkward position my family and I have put you in today. Clearly, we were operating under false information. Her maturity surprised me. No apology necessary, Olivia. And please call me Eleanor. A knock at the door interrupted us. Melanie peeked in. We're ready to resume whenever you are. The lighting is particularly beautiful right now for the ocean backdrop. We'll be right there, I assured her. When she'd gone, Olivia looked between James and me. For what it's worth, my parents are recalibrating. My father is particularly impressed by your actual story, Eleanor. Building a company from nothing is considerably more admirable than inheriting or purchasing success. She gave James a pointed look. You don't want to leave? James asked cautiously. Olivia considered him for a long moment. I haven't decided yet. Right now, I'm curious to hear the rest of your mother's interview. The real story, not the fiction you've been selling me. As we returned to the veranda, the atmosphere had shifted subtly. The Westfields' earlier indignation had tempered into something more complex. Victor's expression suggested reluctant interest, while Camilla maintained a polite but cool facade. Eleanor? Melanie greeted me as I took my seat. I was hoping we might discuss your perspective on intergenerational wealth and values in this next segment. Specifically, how you've approached teaching financial principles to your family. I caught the slight emphasis on her words. She was giving me a perfect opening to address the elephant on the veranda without directly embarrassing anyone. I believe wealth brings responsibility more than privilege, I began carefully. In raising my son, I tried to emphasize that money is a tool, not a measure of personal worth. That true security comes from developing skills and character, not accumulating possessions. The camera panned slightly to include James in the frame, capturing his discomfort. Some might argue that's easy to say when you have wealth, Melanie suggested. The luxury of eschewing luxury, so to speak. Perhaps, I acknowledged, but I built my company from nothing after becoming a young widow. For many years, modesty wasn't a philosophical choice, but a necessity. By the time financial success came, those values were deeply ingrained. And yet, Victor Westfield interjected unexpectedly, you've now purchased one of the most prestigious properties on this coastline. That seems like a departure from modesty. All eyes turned to him, surprised by his direct engagement. A fair observation, I conceded. This house is undoubtedly an indulgence. But even here, I've tried to align the purchase with broader values, conservation, education, community benefit. The property serves purposes beyond personal status. Fascinating, Melanie commented. Mr. Westfield, as someone who has built a brand specifically around luxury and status markers, how do you view this approach to wealth? Victor straightened slightly, clearly recognizing the opportunity to promote his company despite the awkward circumstances. Westfield Luxury Brands celebrates excellence and achievement. We believe success should be visible, tangible. There's a certain authenticity in acknowledging one's position rather than downplaying it. Interesting that you use the word authenticity, Melanie noted. Eleanor, your thoughts? I measured my response carefully, aware that the camera was capturing not just my words, but the subtle dynamics between all of us. I believe authenticity comes from alignment between values and actions, not between status and displays, I replied. The question isn't whether wealth is visible, but whether it's deployed in service of one's true principles. As the interview continued, I noticed Olivia watching me with increasing interest. James, meanwhile, had retreated to the edge of the frame, a witness to the unfolding recalibration of narratives, both his fictional one and the Westfield's materialistic worldview, against the unexpected reality of my presence. The oceanfront property that was supposed to be his triumph had become instead the stage for his most public failure, and perhaps, if he was willing to learn from it, the beginning of something more authentic than anything he had fabricated. I'd like to shift our discussion to something I find particularly fascinating about your approach, Eleanor, Melanie said, skillfully guiding the interview into its next phase. You've mentioned using this property as a marine education center. Could you elaborate on that vision? I felt myself relax slightly, moving into territory I was genuinely passionate about. The coastline here is home to a remarkable ecosystem that many people, even locals, know very little about. I'm converting the boathouse and lower garden into an interactive learning space where school groups can study tide pools, marine conservation, and coastal ecology. So this multi-million-dollar property will effectively become partly public? Melanie clarified. Several days each week. Yes, I confirmed. I'm working with local environmental educators to develop programs that will bring students from across the district, particularly from underserved schools. From the corner of my eye, I could see Camilla Westfield's expression of barely concealed incredulity. The concept of intentionally sharing exclusive oceanfront property with public school children clearly struck her as incomprehensible. That's unusually generous, Victor commented, his tone suggesting he wasn't entirely convinced of my sincerity. Most people purchasing property at this price point are primarily concerned with privacy and exclusivity. I've found that wealth becomes more meaningful when shared purposefully, I replied. The joy of having children learn and discover here will far outweigh whatever pleasure I might get from keeping the property entirely private. Melanie nodded thoughtfully. This philosophy seems to run counter to prevailing attitudes about luxury properties. The Westfields, as leaders in the luxury market, what's your perspective on this kind of, shall we say, democratization of privilege? It was a masterful interviewer's move, contrasting my approach with the Westfields' entire business model in a way they couldn't easily dismiss without seeming callous. Camilla cleared her throat. Well, Westfield Luxury Brands certainly believes in philanthropy, she began carefully. We donate to numerous charities annually, but we also recognize that exclusivity has inherent value. That's what our customers are purchasing, something not everyone can have. Interesting distinction, Melanie observed. Charitable giving versus direct access. Eleanor, you seem to be taking the latter approach. I believe in experiencing generosity directly, I explained. Writing checks is valuable and necessary, but there's something powerful about physically opening your space to others. As I spoke about my plans for the education center, I noticed James watching me with an expression I hadn't seen in years, something close to the admiration he'd shown as a child when I'd explained my building designs to him at our kitchen table. Back then, he'd been proud of my work, before status anxiety and social climbing had twisted his perspective. Would you give us a tour of the areas that will become the education center? Melanie asked. Certainly, I agreed, rising from my seat. As our group moved through the house toward the coastal path leading to the boathouse, I found Olivia walking beside me, having deliberately separated herself from both James and her parents. Your vision for this place is extraordinary, she said quietly, just between us. I studied sustainable architecture in college before my parents pushed me toward interior design. This revelation surprised me. You have an architecture background? She nodded. I specialized in biophilic design, integrating natural elements into built environments, but my father thought it was too niche to be profitable. That's exactly the approach I used in designing this house, I told her, genuinely interested. The The way the structure follows the natural contours of the coastline, the use of local materials. I noticed immediately, she interrupted, excitement breaking through her controlled demeanor. The way you've positioned the windows to track the sun's path, the passive cooling system using the ocean breeze. It's brilliant. Ahead of us, the production team was setting up at the boathouse, while James and the Westfields followed at a distance. This momentary privacy gave me an opportunity to see Olivia as an individual, separate from her parents' materialistic values and James's deceptions. What would you do if you could design freely, without concern for what others think is appropriate? I asked her. She considered this seriously. I'd focus on creating spaces that heal the disconnect between humans and nature, buildings that teach their inhabitants to live more harmoniously with the environment. A wistful smile crossed her face. Exactly what you're doing here, actually. It's never too late to pursue that, I suggested gently. Perhaps, she murmured, her gaze drifting toward James, who was now engaged in what appeared to be a tense conversation with her father. At the boathouse, I explained my plans for converting the space into learning stations where children could examine marine specimens, conduct simple experiments, and learn about ocean conservation. The camera captured my enthusiasm as I showed preliminary sketches of the redesign. The most exciting feature will be the guided tide pool explorations, I explained, leading everyone down the wooden steps to the rocky shoreline below the property. This stretch of coastline has some of the most diverse tide pool ecosystems in the region, but it's typically inaccessible because of private property restrictions. As we carefully navigated the rocks, I pointed out starfish, sea anemones, and tiny crabs visible in the shallow pools. The camera operator captured close-ups of the miniature marine world, while Melanie asked thoughtful questions about conservation efforts. I noticed Victor Westfield had remained at the top of the stairs, apparently unwilling to risk his expensive loafers on the wet rocks. Camilla had ventured halfway down, but stood at a distance, looking uncomfortable in her impractical footwear. In contrast, Olivia had eagerly joined me at the edge of a particularly vivid tide pool, kneeling without concern for her designer sundress as she examined a bright orange starfish. "This is extraordinary," she breathed, genuine wonder in her voice. "I had no idea there was such biodiversity right here." "Most people don't," I agreed. "That's exactly why education is so important." When we returned to the main house, the dynamic had shifted noticeably. The initial shock and awkwardness had evolved into something more complex, a kind of grudging reassessment taking place among the Westfields, an uncertain hovering on James's part, and a growing animation from Olivia that seemed to surprise her parents. During a brief filming break, I overheard Victor speaking quietly but intensely to James near the kitchen. "You misrepresented yourself completely," he was saying. "That's not just dishonest, it's poor business strategy. No partnership can be built on fabricated credentials." "I never meant to mislead anyone," James protested weakly. "I just wanted to impress us," Victor finished for him. "Yes, that much is obvious. But consider this. If you had been truthful about your circumstances and your mother's achievements from the beginning, I might actually have been interested in your marketing insights. Now I question everything you've ever told us." I slipped away before they noticed me, not wanting to embarrass James further by witnessing his dressing down. Despite my disappointment in his behavior, he was still my son, and there were limits to the lesson I'd set out to teach. Back on the veranda, Melanie approached me with evident satisfaction. "This is turning into one of our most compelling episodes ever," she confided. "The contrast between different philosophies of wealth, the family dynamics, it's television gold." "I hope it's not too uncomfortable for everyone," I said, suddenly concerned that my planned lesson had spiraled into something more publicly humiliating than I'd intended. Melanie smiled knowingly. "Sometimes discomfort is the price of growth. And speaking of growth," she glanced at her notes, "I'd love to discuss how your perspective on wealth and purpose evolved throughout your career. Was there a defining moment that shaped your philosophy?" As the cameras began rolling again, I reflected on how this day, which had begun as a simple object lesson for my son, had unexpectedly become a public examination of values, authenticity, and the true meaning of success. "The defining moment," I said, settling back into my chair as the cameras focused on me, "came early in my career, about 5 years after founding my company. The late afternoon sun cast a golden glow across the veranda, illuminating everyone in what photographers call the magic hour. that perfect light that softens edges and lends warmth to every surface it touches. Even the Westfields looked less rigid in this gentle illumination. I had just completed my first truly profitable development, a mixed-use property that had attracted significant attention in the industry. A luxury car dealership approached me, suggesting that as a successful developer, I should upgrade to a vehicle that reflected my new status. I smiled at the memory. I remember standing in that showroom, looking at cars that cost more than my parents' house had, feeling this strange pressure to prove I belonged in the world I was entering. I nearly signed the papers. "What stopped you?" Melanie asked. "My son, actually." I glanced at James, whose expression registered surprise. He was about 7 then, just starting to understand money. That evening, he asked me why I needed an expensive car when our Honda worked perfectly fine. His innocent question made me realize I was about to make a purchase solely to impress people I didn't even respect. The camera panned subtly to capture James's reaction, a mixture of embarrassment and what appeared to be genuine reflection. From that point forward, I continued, I made a conscious decision to measure success by impact rather than possessions. Every project my company undertook had to serve a purpose beyond profit: environmental sustainability, community enhancement, or social benefit. It wasn't always the fastest path to wealth, but it created meaning that no luxury purchase could provide. Yet here we are, Melanie observed, gesturing at the magnificent oceanfront home surrounding us, in what many would consider the ultimate luxury property. Yes, I acknowledged with a small laugh. I'm not immune to appreciating beauty and comfort, but even this indulgence serves purposes beyond status: education, conservation, and honestly, a place to finally enjoy the fruits of decades of work. The difference is that I don't need this house to validate my worth or signal my success to others. Victor Westfield shifted in his seat, looking vaguely uncomfortable. As the founder of a brand built entirely around status signaling, my philosophy represented a direct challenge to his business model. Some might call that position privileged, Camilla interjected, a slight defensive edge to her voice. The luxury of dismissing luxury, so to speak. A fair point, I conceded. There's certainly privilege in having choices at all, but I maintained the same philosophy even when my company was struggling, when appearing successful might have actually helped me secure investors or clients. Authenticity as a business strategy, Melanie summarized. Mr. Westfield, as someone who's built a global brand, what's your perspective on this approach versus the aspirational marketing that drives much of the luxury sector? Victor straightened, clearly recognizing both the challenge and the opportunity to position himself. Westfield Luxury Brands sells more than products. We sell achievement. The visible rewards of success motivate further success. There's a psychological benefit to displaying one's accomplishments. And yet, I suggested gently, those displays often lead to precisely the kind of misrepresentation we've witnessed today. I kept my tone light, avoiding direct reference to James's deception, but the implication hung in the air. An uncomfortable silence followed, broken when Olivia unexpectedly spoke up. I think both perspectives have validity, she said, surprising everyone. Appreciation for quality and craftsmanship doesn't have to equal status obsession. And rejecting materialism doesn't mean abandoning aesthetics or comfort. Melanie's eyes lit up at this thoughtful contribution from the previously quiet young woman. An interesting middle ground. Olivia, as someone of a younger generation, do you see attitudes toward visible wealth changing among your peers? Absolutely, Olivia replied with growing confidence. Many of my contemporaries are more concerned with experiences and impact than acquisitions. Authenticity is valued over perfection. Social media has paradoxically made conspicuous consumption both more pervasive and more criticized. I watched her with new appreciation as she articulated a nuanced perspective that acknowledged both her parents' world and the values I'd expressed. Perhaps James had chosen more wisely than I'd given him credit for. The pendulum always swings, Victor commented, his tone slightly dismissive. Young people reject their parents' values until they have their own success to protect and display. Or perhaps, Olivia countered with unexpected firmness, we've simply recognized that measuring worth through possessions is ultimately hollow. She glanced at James, particularly when those possessions aren't even truly yours. The pointed comment landed like a stone dropping into still water, creating ripples of reaction across everyone present. James flinched visibly, while Camilla's eyebrows rose in surprise at her daughter's directness. Melanie, ever the skilled interviewer, recognized the perfect moment to shift direction. Eleanor, this brings us to something I'm particularly curious about. How do you balance privacy with purpose when opening your home for educational programs, especially in a property of this caliber? Grateful for the redirection, I detailed the practical aspects of the Marine Education Center, the separate access points, the scheduled programs, the balance between private living space and educational areas. As I spoke, I noticed James had moved to the edge of the veranda, staring out at the ocean with an expression I couldn't quite read. When the cameras paused again for a brief equipment adjustment, he approached me hesitantly. "Can we talk for a moment?" he asked quietly. I nodded, following him to a relatively private corner of the veranda. "I've been thinking about what you said earlier," he began, his voice uncharacteristically subdued, "about building relationships on truth rather than fabrications." "Yes?" I encouraged when he paused. "You were right." The admission seemed difficult for him. "I've spent so long trying to project an image that I've lost track of who I actually am and what I've actually accomplished." His sincerity surprised me. I had expected defensiveness, perhaps even continued justification for his deceptions. This glimpse of self-awareness was unexpected. "The ironic thing," he continued with a hollow laugh, "is that I've been so busy trying to impress the Westfields with things I don't own that I never bothered to find out that Olivia and I might actually share values I didn't know I had." I followed his gaze to where Olivia stood, animatedly discussing something with Melanie, her genuine enthusiasm visible in her gestures and expression. "She's talking about sustainable architecture," James said. "Did you know that was her passion before her parents pushed her toward interior design?" I didn't. I was too busy pretending to own beachfront property to actually learn about the woman I'm dating. The self-recrimination in his voice touched me. "It's not too late to start over with honesty," I suggested gently. "Maybe." He didn't sound convinced. "Though after today's humiliation, I doubt the Westfields will allow their daughter anywhere near me." Before I could respond, Melanie called us back to resume filming. As we returned to our positions, I noticed Victor Westfield studying me with an expression I couldn't quite interpret. Something between calculation and grudging respect. Whatever lesson I had intended to teach today had clearly developed in unexpected directions, affecting not just James, but everyone present in ways I hadn't anticipated. "Before we continue with our main interview," Melanie said as filming resumed, "I'd like to explore an interesting dynamic that's emerged today." Her gaze moved deliberately between James and me. "Eleanor, you've built your success on authenticity and purpose, yet your son seems to have taken a different approach to establishing his identity. Would you mind sharing your thoughts on that contrast?" The question hung in the air, fraught with potential for further humiliation or healing. I chose my words carefully, aware that my response would shape not just the interview, but potentially my relationship with James going forward. "Every parent hopes to pass their values to their children," I began thoughtfully. "But ultimately each person must discover their own path. James has talents and qualities entirely his own. Creativity, social intelligence, an ability to connect with people that I've always admired." I glanced at my son, whose surprise at my positive assessment was visible. His journey is his own, with its own lessons and discoveries, including perhaps today's. "And what about you, James?" Melanie asked, turning the spotlight directly on him. "Has your perspective shifted during today's unexpected revelations?" James hesitated, visibly gathering his courage. For a moment, I feared he might retreat into defensiveness or manufactured charm, his typical responses to discomfort. Instead, he straightened his shoulders and met Melanie's gaze directly. "I've spent years trying to impress people by pretending to be something I'm not," he said, his voice gaining strength as he spoke. "Today has been clarifying, humiliating, yes, but also necessary." The candor of his response seemed to surprise everyone, including the Westfields. Victor's eyebrows rose slightly, while Camilla's perfectly maintained expression softened almost imperceptibly. "Would you elaborate on that?" Melanie encouraged. "I've been so focused on projecting success that I've neglected to actually build it," James continued. "Watching my mother today, hearing her describe building something meaningful from nothing, made me realize how shallow my approach has been in comparison." His gaze shifted to Olivia briefly before returning to Melanie. I've also realized that in trying so hard to impress others with what I thought they valued, I missed opportunities to connect around what might actually matter. A thoughtful silence followed this admission. The cameras captured the tableau perfectly. James's vulnerable honesty, my quietly supportive presence, the Westfields' recalibrating assessment, and Olivia's complex expression, somewhere between pain and respect. Mr. and Mrs. Westfield, Melanie said, smoothly widening the conversation. As parents yourselves, how do you view this moment? Has today's experience shifted your perspective on success and its representations? Camilla deferred to Victor with a subtle nod. He cleared his throat, looking mildly uncomfortable at being put on the spot. Our brand is built on the premise that quality and achievement should be visible, he stated, reverting to corporate language as a shield. We stand by that philosophy. Dad, Olivia interjected with surprising firmness, that's a marketing statement, not a personal response. Victor looked startled by his daughter's challenge. After a moment, his corporate facade cracked slightly. Very well. Personally, I find myself reconsidering certain assumptions today, such as, Melanie prompted, such as the notion that worth must be externally validated to be real, he admitted reluctantly. Mrs. Hayes Eleanor has built something undeniably successful without the trappings we typically associate with such achievement. That's thought-provoking. It was the closest thing to a concession I expected from a man who had built an empire on the premise that external validation was essential. Coming from him, it carried significant weight. And you, Mrs. Westfield? Melanie asked, turning to Camilla. Camilla adjusted her designer bracelet, buying a moment to compose her thoughts. I believe presentation matters, she began carefully, but perhaps substance matters more. Eleanor has both in her own way. It's not the approach I would choose, but I can't deny its authenticity. The admission seemed to cost her something, as though acknowledging the validity of a different value system threatened the foundations of her own. Olivia? Melanie continued, including the younger woman in this family reflection. You're positioned between these different philosophies. Where do you find yourself? Olivia's response came without hesitation. I've spent years suppressing my own passions to fit my parents' expectations. She glanced apologetically at her mother and father. Watching Eleanor speak about purpose and impact has reminded me of what I actually care about, creating spaces that connect people with the natural world, not just showcasing wealth. The naked honesty of her statement seemed to stun her parents. Victor looked as though he might object, then subsided, a new uncertainty in his expression. It seems we're witnessing several recalibrations today, Melanie observed. Eleanor, did you anticipate this outcome when you agreed to this interview? I smiled slightly. I anticipated a conversation about values and choices. The specific form it's taken has been educational for everyone, I think. Including you? Melanie asked perceptively. Especially me, I acknowledged. I've been reminded that authenticity requires courage, something I'm seeing from unexpected sources today. I glanced meaningfully at James and Olivia. As the interview continued, focusing now on the architectural features of the house and my plans for its educational use, I noticed a subtle but significant shift in the group dynamics. James had moved closer to Olivia, their body language suggesting a tentative reconnection based on this new, more honest foundation. Victor and Camilla stood slightly apart, their expressions suggesting internal reassessment rather than the earlier judgment and disapproval. When Melanie called for a final break before the concluding segment, Victor approached me with unexpected directness. Your son misrepresented himself quite significantly, he stated without preamble. He did, I agreed, neither defending nor condemning James's actions. Yet you speak of him with genuine pride and affection, despite his deception. He's my son, I said simply. I can disapprove of his choices while still loving who he is and believing in who he can become. Victor seemed to wrestle with this concept. At Westfield, we have zero tolerance for misrepresentation. Authenticity in our products is paramount, even as we sell the aspiration they represent. Perhaps the difference, I suggested gently, is that James isn't a product to be evaluated against specifications. He's a person in progress, learning from his mistakes. Something shifted in Victor's expression. A softening around the eyes, a slight relaxation of his rigid posture. Olivia seems quite taken with your approach to architecture and environmental education, he said, changing the subject abruptly. She's knowledgeable and passionate about sustainable design, I confirmed. You've raised a thoughtful young woman with genuine talent. We may have misdirected that talent, he admitted, with visible difficulty. Camilla and I believed interior design offered more security and status than environmental architecture. It's not too late for her to pursue her true interests, I pointed out. Victor glanced to where Olivia was examining the sustainable materials used in my veranda construction, her animation obvious even from a distance. No, he said quietly. Perhaps it isn't. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, bathing the oceanfront property in spectacular orange and pink hues, I realized that this day, begun as a simple lesson for my son, had catalyzed unexpected reconsiderations for everyone present, including myself. The final segment of the interview took place as the sun began to set, casting long golden rays across the veranda and transforming the ocean into a shimmering canvas of orange and violet. Melanie had positioned us perfectly to capture this spectacular backdrop, the natural beauty emphasizing my points about preserving the coastal environment. As we conclude our conversation, Melanie said, I'd like to discuss the future. Eleanor, what do you envision for this property and your conservation efforts 5 years from now? I outlined my vision for the Marine Education Center, the native plant restoration along the bluffs, and the research partnerships I hope to establish with local universities. As I spoke, I noticed Olivia listening with rapt attention, occasionally nodding in agreement or leaning forward when I mentioned particular ecological approaches. That's an ambitious agenda, Melanie observed. Will you manage these initiatives personally? Initially, yes, I confirmed, though I hope to eventually build a team of passionate environmentalists and educators who share this vision. The right people with the right expertise could expand these programs far beyond what I might accomplish alone. Melanie turned slightly to include the others in the frame. This seems like an appropriate moment to widen our conversation. Today has been unexpected for everyone. Before we conclude, I'd like to hear final thoughts from each of you about what you're taking away from this experience. She gestured toward James first, giving him the opportunity to reframe his narrative. He took a deep breath. I came here today planning to impress people with things that weren't mine. Not just this property, but achievements and status I haven't earned. His voice grew stronger as he continued. What I'm taking away is the understanding that genuine accomplishment requires more than appearances. My mother built something real and meaningful. That's the example I should have been following all along. Olivia? Melanie prompted. I'm reconsidering what success actually means, she said thoughtfully. I've spent years suppressing my passion for sustainable design because it didn't fit certain expectations of prestige or profitability. Today has reminded me that meaningful impact matters more than impressive titles or socially approved career paths. Her parents exchanged glances at this declaration, but remained silent as Melanie turned to them next. Mr. and Mrs. Westfield, as leaders in the luxury sector, has today's discussion challenged any of your assumptions about wealth and its presentation? Camilla spoke first, surprising everyone. I've built my life around certain certainties, she said carefully. That quality must be visible. That achievement deserves display. That refinement sets one apart. She glanced around the elegant, yet understated space I'd created. Today has suggested there might be other approaches equally worthy of respect. Victor nodded, adding, in business, we're taught that perception often matters more than reality. Eleanor has demonstrated that authentic substance can be more powerful than carefully curated appearances. He straightened slightly, reverting to his more formal demeanor, though I maintain that there's nothing wrong with quality being visible when it's genuinely present. A balanced perspective, Melanie acknowledged before turning back to me. Eleanor, final thoughts? The camera focused on me as I considered my response. I believe we all create narratives about success, what it looks like, how it's measured, what it requires. Today has reminded me that those narratives need regular examination. Are they serving our true purpose? Are they aligned with our actual values? Or have they become constraints rather than guides? I glanced at James, adding, I'm also reminded that we all make mistakes in how we present ourselves to the world. The question isn't whether we stumble, but how we recover and what we learn from those moments. Beautiful, Melanie said with genuine appreciation. Thank you all for what has been one of our most illuminating episodes. She turned to address the camera directly for her closing statement. From Seaglass Cove, This is Melanie Winters for Properties with Purpose, reminding you that our spaces reflect not just our taste, but our values and vision for the world we wish to create. And cut, called the director. That's a wrap. Absolutely fantastic material, everyone. As the production team began dismantling equipment and packing up cameras, an awkward silence fell over our group. The artificial structure of the interview had provided a framework for our interactions. Without it, the raw reality of what had transpired hung in the air between us. James approached me first, his expression a mixture of contrition and uncertainty. "Mom, he began, then stopped, seeming to struggle for words. "I'm sorry for all of this, for trying to claim your achievements as mine, for being embarrassed by your choices instead of proud of what you've built." The simple apology touched me more deeply than I'd expected. "Thank you," I said quietly. Though this probably wasn't the gentlest way to teach that lesson. A faint smile crossed his face. Subtlety has never been my strong suit. Apparently, I come by that, honestly. He glanced around at the retreating film crew. Though I never imagined my comeuppance would be quite so public. "If it helps," I offered, "the episode won't air for several weeks. Plenty of time to prepare your friends for the revelation that you don't actually own oceanfront property." His wince suggested this consideration hadn't yet occurred to him. "Right, that's going to be awkward. Or liberating," I suggested. "Authenticity usually is, eventually." Our conversation was interrupted by Olivia joining us, her expression determined despite obvious nervousness. "Mrs. Hayes, Eleanor," she began, "I want to apologize for my part in this situation. I should have questioned James more thoroughly instead of simply accepting his claims." "You believed someone you cared about," I replied gently. "That's not a character flaw." She nodded, acknowledging this, then continued with more confidence. "I'm also hoping to speak with you further about your sustainable design approach. Your integration of native landscaping with the architectural elements is exactly what I focused on in my thesis project." Her genuine enthusiasm was impossible to miss, a stark contrast to the polished social performance she'd initially presented. "I'd be happy to discuss it," I assured her. "Perhaps you'd be interested in consulting on the educational center designs. We're still in the early planning stages, and your background sounds particularly relevant." Her eyes widened slightly. "I'd be honored," she said, a new animation entering her voice as she began describing some initial thoughts about the space. As they talked, I noticed Victor and Camilla observing from a distance, their expressions complex. Victor caught my eye and approached, his wife following a step behind. "This has been an illuminating afternoon," he said, his corporate polish slightly diminished by genuine uncertainty. "Not at all what we expected when James invited us to see his beach house. Life rarely matches our expectations," I observed. "Sometimes that's for the best." "Perhaps," he acknowledged. "Your son's methods were questionable, but I'm beginning to suspect his judgment in other areas might be sound." His gaze shifted meaningfully to where Olivia was now animatedly discussing design concepts with James. Her previous reserve completely vanished. "She hasn't shown this much passion for anything in years," Camilla added quietly. "Not since we convinced her to pursue interior design instead of that environmental architecture program she wanted." The admission revealed more about their family dynamic than perhaps she'd intended. I chose my response carefully. It's never too late to reconsider our paths. For any of us. As the evening light faded into dusk, what had begun as a deliberate lesson in humility had transformed into something far more nuanced, a recalibration of values and expectations for everyone involved, including myself. 2 weeks passed before I heard from James again. During that time, I divided my attention between finalizing plans for the Marine Education Center and fielding excited calls from Melanie about the episode's editing progress. According to her, the network executives were thrilled with the unexpected family drama and authentic emotional journeys captured on camera. "They're calling it our most compelling episode yet," she informed me during our latest call. The contrast between different philosophies of wealth, the real-time recalibrations of relationships, it's exactly the kind of meaningful content we aim for. I'm glad something positive came from what was, frankly, an awkward situation for everyone, I replied, still slightly uncomfortable with how public our family drama would soon become. "That's the beauty of it," Melanie insisted. "The awkwardness evolved into genuine reflection. Those moments of truth are television gold." After we hung up, I wandered onto the veranda, coffee in hand, contemplating how differently the day had unfolded from my expectations. I had intended a simple lesson for James, a necessary but controlled revelation of his deception. Instead, it had spiraled into something far more complex, affecting not just my son, but the Westfields as well, revealing truths none of us had fully acknowledged. The sound of tires on the gravel driveway interrupted my thoughts. Through the coastal pines, I glimpsed James's car pulling up, alone, without the Westfields or Olivia accompanying him. I met him at the front door, uncertain what to expect. His expression was serious, but calm as he greeted me. "Hey, Mom. Got time for a coffee and conversation?" "Always," I assured him, leading him to the kitchen where I poured him a cup. We settled at the breakfast nook overlooking the garden, a moment of silence stretching between us before James finally spoke. "I've been doing a lot of thinking since that day," he began, his fingers tracing the rim of his mug, "about why I felt the need to present myself as something I'm not, about what I actually value versus what I thought I should value. And," I prompted gently when he paused, "and I've made some decisions," he continued with newfound resolve. "First, I've started being completely honest about my actual position and achievements at work. No more exaggerations or implications that I'm further up the ladder than I am." "How's that been?" I asked, genuinely curious. A small smile crossed his face, terrifying at first, then weirdly liberating. "Turns out most people don't actually care what my title is as long as I do good work." "Imagine that," I commented mildly, hiding my pleasure at this realization. "Second," he continued, "I've decided to redirect my career path. The marketing work I've been doing, it's fine, but it's not what I'm passionate about." He hesitated, then added, "I've applied for an MBA program with a focus on sustainable business development. If I'm accepted, I'd start next fall." This revelation surprised me. "That's a significant change. What prompted it?" "Watching you talk about your work," he admitted. "Seeing the genuine fulfillment you get from creating developments with purpose beyond profit. I want that kind of satisfaction from my career." I felt a warmth spread through me at his words. Despite my unconventional method, perhaps the lesson had served its intended purpose after all. "What about Olivia?" I asked carefully. After everything that happened, James's expression softened. "That's actually the most unexpected development." He set down his coffee mug. "We're still together, but something fundamental has changed between us. Once we both dropped the pretenses, we discovered we actually connect on deeper levels than social climbing and status symbols." "I'm glad to hear that," I said sincerely. She seemed to have depth that her parents' influence had somewhat submerged. "You don't know the half of it," James replied with a genuine smile. "Since your interview, she's been in intense discussions with her parents about returning to her original passion for sustainable architecture. Victor and Camilla are actually considering funding a new division of their company focused on eco-luxury development, with Olivia potentially leading the design team." This news genuinely surprised me. "That's not the outcome I would have predicted from the Westfields." "Me neither," James agreed. "But apparently your interview affected Victor more than he initially let on. Something about authentic luxury having deeper meaning than surface appearances really resonated with him. He's been researching sustainable luxury markets and found there's significant untapped potential there, converting a revelation into a business opportunity," I observed with wry amusement. "Very on brand for Victor." "Exactly," James laughed. "But the interesting thing is, this might actually allow Olivia to align her true interests with the family business instead of suppressing them." His expression grew more serious. "Which brings me to another reason for my visit. She's been hoping to consult with you about sustainable oceanfront development. Your expertise combined with her design background could be valuable for both the education center and potentially for this new Westfield venture." I considered this unexpected proposition. "I'd be open to discussions," I said carefully, "though I'd want to be certain their commitment to sustainability is genuine, not just a marketing angle." "That's fair," James acknowledged. "Olivia feels the same way, actually. She doesn't want to compromise environmental principles for profit margins." "She sounds increasingly like someone I'd enjoy working with," I noted, pleased by this evolution. James hesitated, then added, "There's one more thing you should know. The episode of Properties with Purpose is scheduled to air in 3 weeks." I nodded, having already been informed by Melanie. "Are you concerned about that?" "I was," he admitted. "The thought of everyone seeing me exposed as a fraud was terrifying." He straightened slightly. But I've decided to host a viewing party. Invite friends, colleagues, everyone who's heard me exaggerate or misrepresent my circumstances over the years. I raised my eyebrows in surprise. That's a bold choice. It's the right one, he said with newfound conviction. I can either hide from the truth or own it completely. I'm choosing the latter. Looking at my son across the table, I saw something I hadn't fully recognized before. A quiet strength emerging from beneath the facade he'd maintained for so long. Perhaps it had always been there, waiting for the right circumstances to reveal itself. I'm proud of you, I said simply. Not for any achievement or status, but for this willingness to face reality and grow from it. I had a good example, he replied, meeting my gaze directly. It just took me a while to appreciate it. As we finished our coffee and moved to the veranda to discuss his potential MBA programs in more detail, I reflected on how differently this conversation might have gone if I had confronted him privately instead of orchestrating the public revelation. Would he have truly understood the lesson? Would the Westfields have reconsidered their values? Would Olivia have found the courage to reclaim her passion? Sometimes, I realized, the most uncomfortable moments lead to the most necessary growth, a principle I had applied in my business for decades but had hesitated to bring into my personal relationships. Perhaps in that regard, James and I had both learned something valuable from that unexpected afternoon. The evening of the broadcast arrived with a sense of surrealism that I couldn't quite shake. 3 weeks had transformed what began as a private lesson into a public event, one that would expose our family dynamics and the Westfields' reactions to millions of viewers nationwide. James had followed through on his bold decision, hosting a viewing party at his apartment for friends, colleagues, and even his direct supervisors from work. He'd invited me as well, but I'd declined, preferring to watch in the privacy of my home. Some experiences were best processed without an audience, and seeing myself on national television definitely qualified. I settled onto my veranda with a glass of wine as the autumn sunset painted the ocean in deepening shades of amber and violet. My phone buzzed with a text from Melanie. Episode airing in 5 minutes. Highest pre-broadcast interest we've ever had. You're about to become a minor celebrity, Eleanor. The thought was more disconcerting than flattering. I had built my career on substance over spotlight, focusing on my projects rather than personal recognition. Now, ironically, my philosophy of understated accomplishment was about to be broadcast to a national audience. My television was rarely used, but tonight I'd positioned it for optimal viewing from my favorite chair. As the opening music for Properties with Purpose began, I took a deep breath and prepared to watch our family drama unfold through the lens of professional editing and production values. Melanie's introduction was elegant and enticing. Today, we visit a stunning oceanfront property in Seaglass Cove, a home that represents not just architectural achievement, but a profound statement about wealth, purpose, and authenticity. What began as a straightforward profile evolved into something far more revealing about how we define success and what we value most. The camera panned over my property, capturing its integration with the coastal landscape before settling on me, seated on the veranda in that golden afternoon light. I looked more polished than I remembered, the subtle work of the makeup artist evident in my camera-ready appearance. The initial interview unfolded much as I recalled, with my explanation of the house's environmental features and planned educational center. Then came the pivotal moment, James rounding the corner with the Westfields, his expression transforming from confident tour guide to stunned disbelief in real time. The editors had captured the reveal perfectly, cutting between James's shocked face, the Westfields' confused reactions, and my calm acknowledgement of the situation. The background music shifted subtly, enhancing the dramatic tension without overplaying it. What followed was a masterfully constructed narrative of revelation and recalibration. The production team had artfully condensed hours of footage into a compelling 40-minute journey, highlighting key moments of confrontation, reflection, and gradual understanding. I winced slightly at certain moments, the raw hurt on James's face when his deception was exposed, Victor Westfield's initial condescension, my own occasionally too-pointed observations about materialism. Yet the overall arc was redemptive rather than exploitative, showing genuine evolution in everyone's perspectives. Most surprising was how clearly the episode captured transformations I hadn't fully registered in the moment. Olivia's gradual animation as she reconnected with her passion for sustainable design, Camilla Westfield's subtle shift from dismissive to thoughtful as the interview progressed, the moment when James stopped defending himself and began truly listening. The final segment, filmed as the sunset bathed us all in golden light, carried a poignancy that even I found moving. Our closing reflections on authenticity, purpose, and the true meaning of success felt not like rehearsed platitudes, but hard-won insights emerging from genuine discomfort. Melanie's closing statement tied everything together. Perhaps true luxury isn't found in what we own or display, but in the alignment between our values and our choices, the authentic expression of purpose that gives meaning to success. From Seaglass Cove, this is Melanie Winters for Properties with Purpose. As the credits rolled, I sat in silence, processing the strange experience of seeing my private life transformed into public narrative. The story told was true, yet inevitably simplified and shaped by editing choices and narrative requirements. A complex human experience distilled into compelling television. My phone began buzzing with messages almost immediately. The first was from James. Well, that was simultaneously more humiliating and more flattering than I expected. The viewing party is alternating between mortified silence and heartfelt conversations. I think it's going well. I smiled at his uncertainty, imagining the scene at his apartment, colleagues and friends witnessing his most vulnerable moment, followed by his genuine growth. It was either an act of remarkable courage or spectacular miscalculation, perhaps both. The next message came, surprisingly, from Victor Westfield. Eleanor, having now seen the final edit, I must acknowledge the episode captured something valuable. Our discussions since that day have led to significant reconsiderations, both personal and professional. Camilla and I would appreciate an opportunity to continue our conversation about sustainable luxury concepts, if you're amenable. Before I could respond, another text arrived from Olivia. The episode just finished airing. My parents' phones are exploding with reactions from their social circle. Some confusion, some criticism, but also surprising support for the authentic luxury concept Dad's been exploring. And I've already received 3 inquiries about sustainable design consultation. Would still love to discuss potential collaboration on your education center when you're ready. The messages continued arriving, from former colleagues, industry acquaintances who recognized me, friends who hadn't realized the full scope of my achievements. The quiet, purpose-driven life I'd cultivated was suddenly illuminated by unexpected attention. I stepped away from my phone to refill my wine glass, taking a moment on the veranda to absorb the night air and collect my thoughts. The ocean stretched dark and limitless before me, a reminder of perspective. This momentary visibility, whether welcome or not, was just that, momentary. What would endure were the real-world impacts of my work, the education center under development, the environmental protections I'd established, and perhaps, most significantly, the transformed understanding between my son and me. As if summoned by my thoughts, a final text arrived from James. Party's winding down. People are leaving with a lot to think about. So am I. Thank you for the hardest, most important lesson I've ever received. I've spent years trying to impress others by pretending to be something I'm not. Tonight helped me finally understand that the only lasting impression worth making comes from genuine accomplishment and authentic purpose. I think I'm ready to build something real. Maybe tomorrow we could talk more about those MBA programs? I smiled as I typed my response. My door is always open. No pretenses needed. Setting down my phone, I looked out at my oceanfront home. The home I'd purchased after decades of meaningful work. The home that would soon welcome schoolchildren to learn about marine conservation. The home that had unexpectedly become the setting for a different kind of education altogether. The house I had bought and allowed others to believe I lived in alone and friendless had become, through an unexpected chain of events, the catalyst for new connections, recalibrated values, and deeper understanding. Not just for James or the Westfields, but for me as well. Sometimes, I reflected, the greatest purpose a possession can serve is to remind us of what truly matters. Not the possession itself, but the authenticity, impact, and relationships it makes possible. I raised my glass to the night sky, offering a silent toast to unexpected lessons and new beginnings. The credits had rolled on our televised story, but the real narrative of growth, purpose, and authentic connection was just beginning its most interesting chapter. Thank you very much for listening. Please leave a comment with a rating from 0 to 10, subscribe to the channel, and share this story with a friend. Story.